Hello, everyone. It's so nice to see you all here with us today. Thanks for joining us for this really exciting peer learning exchange as part of the Our Town Technical Assistance Program. I wanted to say thank you to the National Endowment for the Arts for working with LISC to do this really important technical assistance program. And thank you all for being here joining us. We're going to jump right into our guidelines and notes for participants today, which is the next slide, Joe. And we're going to start with just our program goals, just reminding everyone what the program goals are for the TA program. And they are to inspire you, to ground you in your work, and to connect you to each other. We really hope that these peer learning exchanges are helping to establish a community of practice within the group. We're hoping that you're able to really share your challenges and successes today together. If you go to the next slide, just a few guidelines and notes for those of you who are participating. When we get into the Q&A at the end, please put your camera on, put your name tag on with your first name, pronouns, and your project location. Just a reminder, these sessions are being recorded. Closed captioning is available if you click on that little button in the bottom of the screen for the live transcript. As folks are doing their presentations and questions come up, please just put them right in the chat. At the end, when we are having more of a group conversation, feel free to unmute and just jump in. We're trying to make this as casual as possible and as easy as possible. And then during that conversation, switch over to the gallery view so you can see everyone and get a chance to say hi and things like that. Again, listen deeply and make no assumptions, ask questions, be curious, and most of all, connect with each other. I want to just thank Margie Waller, who's really done a tremendous job bringing this group together over the last few weeks to get this session ready, and also to Renee Piechocki, who is one of our resource team members, who really worked with the panelists and participants in the conversation to prep their presentations and really focus in on this subject of equitable artist calls. So with that, I am going to turn it right over to Renee, and we're going to jump in. We've got a lot to cover today. So thanks for being here, and Renee, take it away.
Great, thank you so much, Lynn. Thank you, all of you, for joining this presentation and discussion. I was really happy to be invited to work with Margie and Lynn to create this session. Artist selection is one of my favorite processes because it offers the opportunity to learn about new artists, which I always love, and also to learn more about the artists you know. But because artist selection for projects in the public realm generally involves multiple stakeholders from various perspectives and knowledge bases, the process is also an opportunity to kind of create a philosophical communication framework that you can expand on for the rest of the project. Now, I really enjoy considering and reconsidering the selection process for each project. And that's important because, as we all know, there are complex issues related to power, politics, and information exchange that are at play during artist selection. So today is our chance to hear from artists and arts colleagues from across the country about their experiences striving to create a level playing field. So we'll hear our presentation panelists. There'll be maybe a question or two after each one, and then have a discussion before opening up to everyone for questions. If you would prefer that we read your question rather than saying it out loud at the end, please feel free to send it over in the chat. So let's start. Our first speaker today is Christine Wong Yap. Take it away, Christine.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Margie and Renee. So I'm a visual artist and social practitioner. I'm also an occasional blogger and amateur data nerd. Basically, I am just going to share a little bit about the perspective of artists and application processes. So over the past 8 years, I've applied to 104 art competitions. So each one of those question marks actually represents one of those 104. Of those, I was awarded 12 opportunities. That leaves 92 unsuccessful applications. And of those, I have no idea if any of them had any impact or benefit. Another way I kind of look at the data is whenever I receive a rejection notice, I will take, if they say like how many applications they received and how many awards they actually awarded, I'll take that and then enter it into my blog. So this is the top half of this page. Every hash mark that you see at the bottom represents an application. Only those 3 red ones represent the awards. Oops. And this is the bottom half of the page. And then I also calculate the odds. So when it says 1 to 265, that means 265 applicants applied for every 1 person that was awarded. What we're looking at here is like a chart where I created, when I was a selection panel member, I created my own like scoring matrix. And I realized like if my job is to find the top 5 applicants, if there's up to like 15 points, like basically anybody who isn't already going to score 10 points or above, I kind of don't need to look at everything in their application. And I really started to question like, what is the value of applying if you're not even going to come close to being one of the top, in the top like third? And realistically, if organizations are not offering feedback, and if realistically the jurors are not going to kind of like keep those people in mind for other opportunities, like what is the value? So just questioning that. Another thing I want to look at is like the disparity in the time invested in application compared to how much time your application might be seen by jurors. So I just threw out a bunch of numbers and calculated in the best case scenario, how much time a professionalized artist might invest. And I estimated 1 hour. That's still a lot of time, but I assume if you also are reading the application, and of course, every application wants you to put your name underscore, last name underscore 01 in a different way than the last application, which was like number, no underscore, blah, 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 blah. So in the best case scenario, I estimated 1 hour. And then in the best case scenario, and this is highly unlikely and rare, I think, a juror might review it for up to 28 minutes, which I think is very unlikely. Now, in the worst case scenario, if somebody is an emerging artist or maybe a non-traditional artist in the sense that they didn't go to school for art, they might spend a lot of time, maybe 20 hours, like shooting documentation, getting access to Photoshop, etc. And then maybe the jury spends minimal time, like 4 minutes reviewing it. And then when you look at that compared to the previous situation where there's for every 2 hours that the artist, or for every like 2 minutes that the artist invests, there's 1 minute of being reviewed. In this case, it's every 300 times the amount that the artist invests versus what the jury sees. And one thing I just want to underscore is what's the difference between an emerging and non-professional artist or non-traditional artist with a professionalized artist? Like what makes the professionalized artist more efficient? And a lot of these things in terms of resources, skills, capacities, and technology are tied to privilege. So I know when organizations try to put together jury systems, they try to make it so that the jury's time is highly valued. It's a very efficient system, but I want to say let's put some of that energy towards artists too, because everybody's time is a precious resource. And just to end on this note, I think sharing info is a win-win situation. I think better calls for artists helps artists make better applications, and it helps jurors be more focused and efficient. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Christine. I really, I love your presentation and the opportunity to see the math and the statistics of selection. It puts a realistic framework on selection. It's definitely going to make me evaluate the time that artists need to prepare an application the next time I put out a call. You know, something I've always done when I am sending out the rejection letter is be sure to write who the finalists were or who was chosen, because I feel like that little bit of information can really help artists understand maybe another layer in addition to the hundreds of applications that were received, but you know, why they may not have been chosen. You know, your presentation is very focused on that first step of the process. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on like what would like how, you know, about artist time or respecting people's time or making the process more streamlined when you get to the finalist stage, helping artists prepare for the interview, you know, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in those situations, like I'm not that great speaking off the cuff, and if I think anybody can relate to that kind of like performance anxiety. So if you can provide a list of the questions that you're going to ask participants, like that was super, super helpful. If you can tell people in advance, like what kinds of questions to expect, what they should prepare, if they should bring anything, if they're going to be asked to go through their slides so they can kind of mentally rehearse, anything like that.
That's a really great tip. Yeah, especially that kind of tech check. Now when we're doing so many of our interviews by Zoom, like making sure that whether you're using Teams or WebEx or whatever, that you know you feel comfortable in the platform. Thanks for mentioning that. Okay, so now I want to ask you more questions, but I'm going to feel that way about everyone. Let's move on to Richard Young.
Hi. Should I just go ahead?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Richard Young, and I'm the executive director of a small nonprofit organization here in Lexington, Kentucky called Civic Lex. We recently launched a civic artist in residency program that we built in partnership with our city government here, the Lexington Fayette Urban County Government, and Bluegrass Community Foundation. And when we were going to design our artistic sort of selection process, we were selecting 3 artists. We knew that we wanted 3 in 3 different departments of our city government. But we really were building a selection process from scratch. My background is as an artist, and obviously as a nonprofit organization, we're used to applying for things as well. So we sort of had that insight, but we really wanted to build something sort of new and different for our community, and something that could really lead with our values. And so the values that we sort of established at the beginning of this process was this sort of giving this project distributed ownership and control. And so we built this very large advisory group of about 30 people from across city government, artists, and community members, and sort of put a lot of this process in their hands. And the selection process and the application process was a big part of that. But one of the things that was really important for us was also building the sort of culture of civic practice here in Lexington. And so for that, we really restricted who could apply for our residency to just Fayette County-based artists. And so as we built our selection and application process, we really relied on artists in our advisory group to sort of help shape that process. And that required some really specific facilitation techniques to sort of decenter the voices of city employees who were really important in this process, but you know, I think come with a lot of expertise and a lot of sort of, but also a lot of baggage from the way things are traditionally done in the city. And so it really required some really specific facilitation methods and some really specific, honestly, some vulnerability on their part to really put this process in the hands of our artists. And so we wanted to create in our application as much information as possible. That was something that we heard from many of the artists in our on our selection team, is that, you know, sometimes we don't feel like we have all of the information in the application. And so we built this really robust, beautiful application that was 10 pages of information and this just like very detailed, very lovely, gorgeous document. And then about a week before we were going to launch it, we had sort of one of our advisory group meetings, and one of our advisory group members was like, you know, this is too much. I think we need to start over this process. And so about a week before our application was going to go live to our community, we ended up completely tearing it apart and building a whole new one from scratch. And for us, it was obviously very trying for those of us that were actually crafting the application and leading these sorts of sessions with our advisory group to build it. But it was really important to have that flexibility for us and have this sort of really listen to the folks that have that sort of expertise on our advisory group. And so what ended up happening is that we created what we thought was a really amazing application that was exactly 1 page long. It had 6 questions, an opportunity for people to submit their resume, a couple work samples requested. We allowed people to submit in either written word or videos, was a really important aspect of that for us. So we required, we didn't really require that much of the artists. Each of the questions were about 500 character limit. The video submission, we received about half of our applications through video submission, which was really great. And as we got applications in, we would actually review them in real time and follow back up with the artists and let them know how they could strengthen their application. We had our application window open for about a month and a half. And our team would read through them every week as they came in. We would follow back up with the artists and say, hey, this is great. These are the things that we think could help you build a stronger application, just in terms of word changes. And is there this part of your application that you could enhance a little bit or maybe focus more on? And we allowed artists to edit their applications all the way up until the deadline. And we encouraged this in all of our workshops that we sort of had for artistic selection. We said, hey, get your application in early so we can review it and get back with you. And actually, at the end of the process, 83% of our applicants had edited their application in some form or another. It took a lot of logistics on our end to be able to process those changes and make sure they were the fully up-to-date documents. But what it did was give a lot of our artists who were applying for the first time to a residency, because this is a very locally focused residency program, it gave them a lot of confidence in doing it in the future. And that's something we heard in our evaluations and talking with past applicants. The good news is that we had 51 folks end up submitting final applications from 45 different types of artistic media and 15 different zip codes across Fayette County. And for us, it was a really robust turnout. We had 11 folks review those applications. There was a mix of folks inside the city government on our team, as well as artists. And we ended up with a pool of 10 finalists that were unbelievable, who went through an interview process. Bringing up sharing the questions in advance was something that we did. It's a really important aspect of that. And we ended up with 3 unbelievable artists that are now in our program. And one of the things that we've heard from each of them who come from sort of different levels of formal artistic production as a career is that the application process gave them, our application process and our ability to be flexible and responsive to what they needed, gave them the confidence to apply and gave them the confidence that when they were starting out in these new positions with us, that they knew what they were doing. So that's a little bit about our selection and application process, and I'm happy to talk more about it with anyone that wants to talk with me.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's great to hear about, this act of bravery, right? To say, hey, we're willing to reevaluate everything we're doing and start over to make it more artist friendly. So I love hearing this story. And thanks for explaining that you went from 51-ish applications to 10 finalists to 3 people who were selected. So much of your talk was just focused on the first process. So I'm going to ask a similar question that I did to Christine, which is, did you make any changes in the interview process that made it more equitable for the artists and more easier to participate for the panelists?
Yeah, so that's a great question. That sort of finalist process was a little crazy. So we had 10 artists interviewing, each with 2 departments. So if you can do this sort of math on how many interviews that was, it was about 30 it was about 30 interviews over the course of a week. But one of the things that we found, right, was that there were different levels of access to technology. So we offered for a lot of our artists that we could actually come to them and do the interview with them in their homes or at a park near their house. We obviously offered the opportunity to do interviews sort of in Zoom, but we also offer the opportunity for folks to actually just respond to our written questions in this sort of interview period. We wanted those responses via video, right, so that we could really get a sense for who they were personally, but offering a wide variety of ways to respond in that sort of finalist interview process was really, really important to us. And a lot of our finalists took us up on those opportunities.
Right, that's awesome. You know, in the very beginning, I have one more question for you. In the beginning, you talked about aligning your process with your values. And then you talked about a committee that came together. But was that committee part of establishing the values, or was that something that your organization did?
A little bit of both, I think. You know, in one way, I think we brought the values that we have as an organization of sort of distributed leadership and distributed control to this process. We for any of our programs, we generally form these very large advisory groups to get as much opinion as possible. But then they really led and brought to that conversation with this sort of framing of trying to really nurture this field of civic practice in Lexington. And I think that led to a lot of the decisions we made, both about it being an entirely local artist, but also that the application process itself should be a way to develop people's potential and give them sort of a professional development opportunity through the application process. And so that's really why we developed this sort of iterative and responsive framework for our evaluation, where we would continually follow up with the artists. And so that was, you know, I feel like there's a little bit of both, which is exactly what we wanted, right? Like it brings a lot of new perspectives to our work, which is helpful, and we can hopefully share some of our perspectives with folks that get engaged with our work.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Appreciate it. So our next speaker is Matt Greiner. Matt, I think you're muted. Oh, there you go.
Hi, everybody here. Thank you for being here. I am going to share a little bit of screen here. And there we go. Are we seeing my screen?
Yes, it looks great.
Great. So regardless of we're going to move quickly here, but I always like to start with this quote. Most often, the strongest single importance of a work is the celebration of some kind of temporary community, which works for me both in terms of the artistic products that I'm happy to help realize. And I think it actually applies to several points in the process that we're about to describe. So our project had a fair degree of complexity, and I'd like to introduce it so that there's a little bit of understanding there. We were actually working to create and use public art to create an essential overlay of safety and education with regional water trails improvement effort. So this is a larger process that has been going on for 10, 11 years to connect recreational trails with recreational waterways, over 150 miles of them, and bring ultimately improvement to 86 access points of rivers in the Des Moines metro area by adding a pilot project to show how public art could provide safety and education and help people connect better with the rivers that they felt very dissociated or even afraid of in recent generations. That was the goal. We talked about that in terms of it being a beautiful and uniquely compelling mode of communication, public art, and a contribution to regional distinction and quality of life. There's our map. We had 3 pilot sites that we're working with or have the ability to work with. And through a great amount of stakeholder input with on the part of my team and with the project leaders, we determined that we had a problem statement that really boiled down to asking artists to solve 2 things. Artists would design ways to beckon people to the river and communicate whether a river is safe to enter and use. The artists ended up having wonderful different perspectives on ways to approach each of these things. The safety one in particular ended up finding very different ways of being framed depending on how the artists approached it, and also how different populations had different needs in that area. So we ultimately kind of boiled it down, working with the DNR and some others to understand that the best way, there was a lot of talk at the beginning about having real-time data monitoring, et cetera. Some of that ultimately was not available in time to be included in the project. So we looked at it primarily as a matter of a measure of flow in the river. And that's information that's available from essentially Coast Guard sensors that are kind of all throughout the United States. And what we realized was if the water was too high, it would really be only suitable for expert use. If it's too low, it's no fun because you spend all your time in sandbars. And so there's kind of this range of just right that is almost easily to see based on just the flow and the level of the water at a given location. Because we had all of that, and because we were integrating with 11 plus years of planning and multiple engineering entities, public and private, some of the sites that we are working in are currently under improvement through federal build grants. There was an enormous amount of information, and I'm really grateful to hear Richard's mention about that decision to stop and pare things down, because we actually had a great deal of internal conversation about the level of information being provided. And it almost was contentious at times, I would say. So we started with an RFQ, which is shown on the left. And it was actually a very simple front and back. The graphic was designed in order to communicate the problem statement very clearly, and also describe what our qualifications expectations were. Once we had artists selected for proposal development, the RFP that was developed was nearly, I believe in the end, 10 or 11 pages long. And if you look, it's reflected in the lower right corner. That top right orange box is actually hot links to constantly updated, shared hard drive with like new additions of information for the artists, as well as the flow meter links and other resources that artists could use. Ultimately, we tried to communicate it where the smallest amount of information that would be needed for an artist to do their work in their method was available easily, but a great wealth of data and background was also available for anybody who chose to indulge themselves in that way, if that was important to their process. So in this course, we needed to make sure that all of our artists were prepared to do their best work and get the best sort of information they could from a great many stakeholder input sessions. We'll recognize that it's pretty often if you've got, say, 3 artists developing a proposal and you want them to be able to connect, say, with the city engineer to make sure that their final proposal is going to be successful and not run into some sort of pitfall where they say, we would have told you it couldn't be more than 3 feet high if you'd have just asked. This is the sort of thing that can really sink a project. And so we wanted to make sure all of that was well understood with all of the artists, but we didn't want, because we had really nearly 6 groups, many of these that are listed here, project leaders, representative committees, engineering groups, cities. There are a great many private entities with stakes in this larger water trails project. We needed to facilitate a lot of input sessions with 3 different artists. And that's consistently been a bit of a logistical challenge. How are we providing artists with access to the most information that they may want, being able to ask questions and prepare their most successful applications, but also not be duplicating effort, taking a lot of these other professionals or community volunteers' time, and also our own time in terms of kind of answering and asking and answering the same questions from artists over and over. There tends to be a lot of overlap there. So what we did was we started to host each of these input sessions for all artists to join simultaneously with the stakeholders. And they shared in that question and ask time with each of the stakeholders, which worked really well for most of them. Our sense was that it really engendered a very collaborative spirit among the artist teams who then drew some inspiration from one another rather than feeling very competitive and cloistered. And my hope, and I believe this was mostly true, was also that the artists appreciated getting to know one another. It's always a nice way to, expand our networks and make new friends. One thing that seemed a bit missing from our stakeholder groups, we worked really hard to be inclusive of everything that would allow our project proposals to be successful and attractive and inclusive, and getting voices from all of the necessary areas. And in the end, we ended up having one thing that was really notably absent, which was the perspective of people who have greater sophistication or insight or even just enthusiasm for arts. And so that made it a difficult proposition in some of our processes to defend against more practical objections to aspects of projects, like say maintenance, or why is it this color, some of those sorts of things that juries can become preoccupied with. Our proposal development was offered to Matthew Mazzata, Andrea Pauly, and that's Emily Stover and Amanda Lovely, and all of them did just fantastic work for this project. But we did something that was much like what Richard was talking about, where we, not in the RFQ process, but in the proposal development process, we did do staged and iterative proposals. So the artists had 6 or 7 weeks to develop their proposals through all of that stakeholder input session. And then their proposals came to a select team, first to just myself and my group, and then to our immediate project leaders, those who had hired us to do the work. And we gave them feedback both on their proposals and also the way that was being presented. And we did that several times until we arrived at our selection for the winner. And I believe all of the artists, even if their projects did not change real substantially in that process, the way in which it was communicated, visualized, and presented was greatly improved in terms of just how clear some of the things were being communicated. So I felt like that sort of little bit of having the time to stop, check, and provide feedback and refine was appreciated by all of us. We did also invite and ask each of the artists to record.
Matt, I'm sorry, it's Lynn. I just need to jump in because I've been sending you little notes about time, and I just want to.
Oh, I apologize.
That's okay.
Are we at 5 or 7?
Oh, we're at like 10.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
Thank you very much. That was the winner.
Sorry.
Well, Matt, if you do just want to, I mean, after those 10 minutes, I'll only ask you one follow-up question, but do you just want to reshare and just show the proposal really quickly?
I don't have any cash.
The proposal?
Yeah,
$100?
didn't you just say there's the winner?
Oh,
yeah.
No, I don't.
Do you want to show it or?
Sure, here we go. So this was Heads Up by Matthew Mazzata was the winning thing. This is a 12-foot duck. It is submerged when the water is at one level, and these staged buoys allow it to have a head up when the water is too high. And so it's, yeah, we're really looking forward to having this in our community.
Yeah, what a fun take on a kinetic sculpture. I know that we are a little bit over time, so I'll just ask you one really quick nuts and bolts question, which is for the proposal phase, who did the artist contract and what fee were they paid?
Sure. We wanted to make a very generous and therefore attractive to talented artists. So previous work, we have tended to peg our fees as in relation to the total project budget. And in this case, we actually went for $5,000 for the proposal development, and we had $1,500 additional for travel that went primarily unused, and we actually paid that to the artists as well.
Great, it's nice to hear such a generous budget. It sounds like the artist did a lot of work in their proposals. Okay, well, next speaker is Julie Garreau. Thanks, Matt.
Hey, everybody. Am I off the mute? Yeah. Well, thank you. My name is Julie Garreau, and I'm the Executive Director of the Shine River Youth Project. and I am located on the Cheyenne River Reservation in South Dakota, representing CRYP, which is a 30-year-old organization that does a lot in our community. The arts just being one part of that, but we also have an organic garden, a teen center, a youth center. We have a strong social entrepreneurship aspect of us. But one of the things I wanted to share about today is how over the course of probably in the last 7 years, we've really, really evolved our arts programming, which includes a graffiti jam amongst many things that we do. We have an arts internship, we have daily arts and crafts, we have art camps, we do all these amazing things. But the graffiti jam, which is an invitational event, happens every year. And honestly, for the first year, I really intended to have just a 1-year event. And it was so popular and it's grown so much and the community really loves it that we just finished up our 7th year. So I wanted to go ahead and just show about 1.5 minutes of one of our videos. So it'll give you a good sense of kind of the action and activity and the color and creativity that we bring to our community. So go ahead and show that.
To be able to have access to that at a much younger age is amazing.
Art and graffiti in particular, it evolved from written language. And even though Lakota and a lot of indigenous languages aren't written, we're seeing something kind of happening where we have a younger generation of people that resonate with art, they resonate with imagery, and being able to incorporate the Lakota language into a lot of the pieces in the murals creates a sense of pride in a way that relates to them and allows them to be able to embrace it and think a little bit more about it.
Part of the tradition of Lakota people and many other indigenous cultures to adorn your clothing and your homes with designs that tell stories and tell part of that history. And to me, this is a continuation of like a teepee painting or painting on a parfleche or a hide painting. This is an extension of that tradition. It's just contemporized because it's with an aerosol instead of earth pigments.
We're writing words that mean something in Lakota. In this day and age, anybody, some kid that might be curious, would just pick up his phone, type it in, and be like, oh, mom, that says welcome, or whatever the name of that building is because of the last name of the Native Americans that reside here because of this family or this one person that stood out in history. Now they know that, and it's all connected to Red Can, Lakota culture, and just the sake of art, you know, just making art.
Okay, so yeah, this just gives you a little bit of a sense of the kind of things that we're doing, along with all those really, I think, creative and inspiring things that CRYP does for the community. The Red Can Graffiti Jam, which is an invitational, has grown from that first year to its 7th year to where we have artists reaching out to us from all over the world who want to come. And I have more artists now than I can house, actually. And what's interesting about it is that the artists who have been participating, some have come every year for 7 years. Some will have joined us for their first this year, but you know, I only have so much space and I only have so much in resources. So it's kind of going to get interesting at some point when, you know, they don't want to really leave the family and to bring new people in, but we'll figure that out. But, you know, I think one of the things that we had to keep in mind as we developed this program, which in the end, like I can simplify it and I could say that in the end, this really is youth programming, but you also want to add that it is community development, especially as from what we've seen over the past 7 years, which is, you know, the very first year and the very first camp, teaching graffiti, that kind of thing. The response was really, well, you're going to teach our children to vandalize, or, you know, they weren't quite sure about the murals that we were putting on. To now I have people constantly reaching out to me saying, I want my garage painted, I want my building painted. Morrow Grand Electric, which is one of the local companies, they would like their building painted. So it's really grown into this really well-received project. And so my job as I'm Cheyenne River Lakota, I was born and raised here. So one of the things that I have to make sure that I do, being a gatekeeper for my community, is really preparing the artists for when they come to our community. So, you know, I probably start, our event is typically in July. I start contacting them in January, talking about who's going to come and how I find the artist. You know, in the very beginning, I recall us creating this application and we were going to go through all this process. Well, that just didn't work. So what we do now is, what I realize is the graffiti world is big, but it's very small. So everybody knows everybody. And so a lot of the time I will just base it on the recommendations of the artists who have been coming for years. They knew who everybody is, and I can reach out. If somebody reaches out to me, I can reach back to the artists who have been here before, ask them about them. They'll give a recommendation, because certainly Red Can is not a fit for everybody. Certainly, I think it's interesting that Lakota culture and graffiti culture have blended so well. I think they're probably both a little controversial, so maybe that's why it works so well. But in the end, bringing people to our community who are safe, who understand the challenges that we have, who want to be a part of doing something really amazing for a group of people, and those are the artists that we've really been able to secure to have them come. But I spend months with orientation with them before anything goes up on the walls. Their murals, their renderings are shared with me, so we can talk about that. Sometimes it's up until the very last night before they go out painting. But I think making sure that our community is respected, that the murals that we put up are culturally relevant, that they are really actually telling our story. And I think, I was really concerned about if they are non-native or they're not from our community. One of the questions I think we had, and my concern was, well, what would people think about someone else telling our story? But in the end, I realized that they're just helping us tell our story. I'm very engaged with them. The community is very engaged with them. And, the other issue is, like, do they really want to work with kids? Because that's a big part of it. So, the kids our interns will assist them as they paint their murals. Some of the artists will teach our camp while they're here. So it's really this very, very interactive thing between kids, community, and artists. So in order to come to Cheyenne River to participate in CRYP's Graffiti Jam, you really want to be a part of this community effort that really supports the challenges that we have, wants to beautify a community, wants to bring all this beautiful artwork, but doing it in a really respectful, culturally reflective way is really what we want to do. And so far we've really, we have run into artists who, it wasn't a great fit, so they may not be coming back again. But that's my job. That's our job here at the Cheyenne River Youth Project. We make sure that our artists are really being brought into what the community's needs are. So it's been going very well, and I'm surprised at how people are reaching out to me saying, we'd like to have a Red Can Montana. Last year we did it. I had to go virtual. So Red Can was in 7 different cities. It's really interesting how much we've grown, but again, it's a youth program, and our kids have access to all these really amazing artists who want to share their talent, give of their time, and just help a community that's really challenged. But it's a relationship that we build. It's not this one-off sort of event that we have. I think I'm kind of out of time. So
yeah. I wish you weren't, because I love hearing about Red Can and your work. Julie, I'm going to ask you a couple questions though before we move on to our last speaker, because you're so focused on involving young people from your from your community. And I'm curious, I'm sorry I didn't think to ask you this ahead of time, but do the young people participate in artist selection at all? I know you use a very word of mouth method.
Yeah, I wouldn't say they're part of the selection process, because they're not always here during those times that I'm working on the project for the year. But a lot of the artists that we have at Red Can also come during the year, and they teach. They're part of their art camps, or they're putting up murals. So there's some relationship with a lot of the kids already. So they're involved that way.
I see. That makes sense. Can you also talk a little bit about, your it's interesting to see you and Matt back to back, because he had this very elaborate proposal process, right? But yours, like, the artwork is happening right away, right? Their artists aren't submitting drawings, right? Like they're there to kind of be there live painting. How do you manage feedback? Because it's probably coming any time of day or night.
It can be both. It can be very positive. Generally, it's almost all positive. I will have field people that might be some naysayers, but I listen to that. I take criticisms, I take critiques very, very seriously. And I really, really try to understand why. I think this last summer, this last RITCAN, we created this mural that was an old building. It was about 25 feet high, 170 feet wide. So that's a huge mural, and it's sitting right in the middle of town. So it was interesting because I think I got one person who gave me some negative feedback, but I kind of sent her a side note, tried to explain what the situation is, because we're a really small community, and I really want people to understand what we're trying to do. So feedback, I'll try and just address it individually, but for the most part, now it is a really well-received project, and people look forward to it. And when we go to taking down the murals, we get more negative feedback when we're removing a mural to get it ready for the next one. So I think it's just, interesting. RITCAN is probably here to stay for a while.
Yeah, well, congratulations. What you thought was a one-year thing turned into a big tradition that people really look forward to.
It really
so
is.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Oh, I love learning about it. Okay, our next speaker is Dan Swern.
Good afternoon and good morning to our colleagues on the West Coast, and thank you to LISC for the invitation to participate in today's peer exchange. My name is Dan Swern. I'm the producing director for CoLab Arts in New Brunswick, New Jersey, where we engage artists with social advocates and communities to create transformative new work. I'm participating today in reference to our artist residency program, where we place social practice artists in non-arts organizations and agencies and paid part-time staff positions. Our system's goal is to show our partner organizations the value of adding artist positions to their staff structure and anticipate that they'll create a new job for an artist following the completion of our residency. I'm going to be speaking a bit about artist compensation, determining market rates, and the importance of measuring artist economic impact through purchasing power, and some suggestions towards more equitable compensation practices when going through a hiring process. When considering partnering with a non-arts agency or organization, it's important to be transparent and upfront in discussing and asking questions regarding material value. There are 2 points to consider. What is the partner organization financial and staff context in which you can expect to employ an artist? Nonprofit organizations and government agencies are largely dependent upon contributed income, where there isn't an opportunity for profit sharing, and salaries typically follow a director, manager, associate rate structure. And we're suggesting the creation of a new position that works independently of traditional departments. Where does that salary then fit into the typical administrative role structure? Does your partner organization understand what social or civic practice means? Does your partner understand what artistic practice means? This isn't meant to be condescending, but there is a real knowledge gap between what many organizations see as a pejorative arts and crafts and those that are able and willing to integrate creative engagement into their strategic plan. So what does this mean substantively? Our responsibility through the artist residency is to demonstrate an expertise that is absent in the rest of the organization, that has demonstrable value, and that is worth the cost of a commensurate living wage. Which brings up the next question. How do you determine salary rates for full or part-time social practice artist positions with limited professional data sets? What can the local market bear? First, you can look internally to see if there are rate comparisons within your own institution. For CoLab Arts, our part-time general manager works 20 hours per week at $25 an hour. For teaching artists, when they work full-time for term-based contracts, they work $25 an hour, and our workshop session-based positions are $50 an hour. Second, you can use more widely accessible data sets to approximate comparable rate information. In considering a commercial design job, I looked up graphic designer, and for a trade-based job, I looked up house painter. Both positions on average nationally make $25 an hour, with a huge ceiling for improving that rate over time. For an agency-based staff position, I looked up social worker and found the average to be $26 per hour, with a rate ceiling around $43 an hour. And once you have an artist rate in hand, you have to then consider your total budget. I'll offer our own experience where we considered and ultimately decided to increase our residencies from 10 hours to 20 hours per week. Consider your geography. Is a large artist community already in your backyard, or is someone you're hiring going to have to spend $30 per day and 4 hours round trip on public transportation in order to do on-site engagement? Consider your capacity. Someone who works fewer hours each week isn't going to need less training. They're still going to have to meet the same number of staff members, the same community partners, and the same constituents. Your management labor doesn't change, just the ratio of management and meeting hours versus productivity hours are not in your favor. In terms of value proposition, adding 10 hours each week has been incredibly effective. The big issue had been that at 10 hours per week, we had to compromise in our residencies, where the placed artists would either put greater emphasis on their engagement work or greater emphasis on their studio work, but one would have to suffer. At 20 hours, we had eliminated that compromise and the quality of all aspects of the residency have improved. And if you're looking for language to help distinguish between commission cost, I frame lower cost commissions as deliverable based, where a more restrictive budget can be used towards specific skill-based and time-based interventions, versus a residency-based commission that is more open-ended and where the work is determined over time through the direct engagement. 20 hours per week over 36 weeks at $27.77 per hour has been a bit of a perfect formula for us so far. It's increased our applicant pool with higher skilled and more experienced artists. It's created enough space in the week for our resident artists to be more successful in managing their own time and producing stronger documentation. And for our marketing, $20,000 is a really attention-grabbing number. And it introduced a new economic measurement that I like to refer to as purchasing power. Our resident artists are able to, one, have greater choice as to how they produce their work and with whom, and two, they can use their own money to directly leverage change within the communities where they're working. Both of our current resident artists have chosen to hire community members to participate in the development and performance of their own work at fair market rate. When working with amateur artists, that's an exceedingly more expensive proposition. And one of our artists committed to making a $1,000 donation to start a new community arts program that was requested by the partner constituency. The organization partner agreed to match her donation and ultimately replaced her donation and covered the whole cost of the program. What I'm not going to cover here, but what I am working on for next year's residency is how to create a more equitable production budget that amplifies our artists' purchasing power without impacting their take home. Okay, the last thing I'm going to talk about is how you extend fair rate setting into your hiring process. We've talked a lot about the deep thinking that goes into our labor compensation, but I also firmly believe in application compensation. I've mainly seen this as a practice in commercial bidding, and I believe NEFA does this for finalist applicants for some of its grant programs. I want to share some ways in which we try to compensate artists' time through our application process. One is through consultation fee. Depending on the position being hired for, an hour spent with an applicant may ask that they share a lot of proprietary information about their process. Consider offering a consultation fee in advance of the interview to get as much value out of that hour as possible without any perceived ickiness. Number two, offer a deliverable-based residency. If the applicant is technically strong but needs more training in social practice, this is a great way to invite them and their work into a community. Three, offer a small commission. Consider building discretionary commissions into your project budgets. Use these as relationship building tools with artists whom you might not be able to offer full projects or residencies, but would like to see more of their work and see how well they work with you. And four, preemptive compensation. Create a budget line that allows you to approach and request meetings with new artists and compensates them for their time. CoLab Arts' version of this is our monthly artist grant, where we promote a social practice artist in New Jersey who we previously didn't know and request an hour phone call just to get to know them. And so what do we look for in determining these other compensatory opportunities? Lived experience. We may receive an application from an artist who hails directly from or identifies with a partner community. They may not have the practical experience at the time of the application, but we believe that with a little training, they could be an incredible candidate for another residency. Number two, adjacent experience. An applicant applied for a residency reflective of one set of skills, but also have another that may be appropriate for a different project or commission. And three, relationship building. An artist is clearly strong and may not be appropriate to hire in this instance, but is someone with whom you want to create a track record of collaboration. I hope this has been a helpful overview and look forward to sharing more over the course of the exchange. Thank you.
My jaw is open, Dan, because what I love about your presentation is that your organization really dug in to look at all those invisible, uncompensated tasks of being an artist, right? So like the fact that your monthly artist grant to pay someone to just kind of chat and get to know you is amazing, right? Because that, whether it's virtual or in person, right? Getting ready for that studio visit or that phone call takes so much time, right? And a lot of anxiety usually. So congratulations to you for coming up with that. I'm I'm stealing. I really love it.
Thank you.
You said something, I think, yeah, there's just so much to dig in here. You said something really interesting in the very also to me, which was acknowledging that some of your partners that you work with in artist selection don't necessarily have a lot of arts knowledge, right? Like, so they have expertise in what they do and their layer of the community. I'm wondering if what you've done, if anything, to kind of like increase their arts knowledge, right? So they can be, you know, more fully participating in artist selection.
Yeah. Well, and when we do our interviews, that we do a panel, and then when our finalists are selected, we do direct interviews with the partners in the room with us. So our interview process is, I do a 30-minute like one-on-one, just like, hey, this is what you're going to expect. Tell me your questions now. And so I can coach them essentially for the way they need to talk to the partner organization, again, because the language just isn't necessarily shared, but it's important that they see whether or not they can work together in that instance.
Yeah.
We also use a lot of oral history in our work, which I found to be a really valuable tool, because they start to hear the voices of their own community reflected directly in our work, whether it's just through a digital humanities platform we'll create in conjunction with the work or directly inside the art. And so they can sort of see how the participant sees themselves, and which is itself transformative for them, but also they know that the presence of the organization is consistent through the work.
That's awesome. I feel like it's time to get to our whole facilitated Q&A. I could be quizzing you. You have so many facts and figures. You know, I just want to say also, I love the work that you did to identify the pay scale, right? Like looking at house painters, looking at social workers, what their average is, and then again, just acknowledging that the full scope of artistic practice really is not only about making the work, right? Like the actual physical activity of art making. There's all that thinking and engagement and, you know, getting to know people that is really key to making a good artist residency, a good work of public art. So I just, it was really great to hear how you, that, which is awesome. So we have,
I do just want to say quickly, just because I appreciate that, but I just want to be clear also that it also came with making big mistakes, or at least learning from our community when we've made mistakes. Because we started our rate, I said like 10 hours a week, which is a $10,000 residency. And we got huge community pushback on that very loudly on Facebook. And so that was something we had to take into consideration. Why was this a concern? And so we started to look at, because we were responding to market directly within our neighborhood and in our community in Central Jersey, but what we really needed to respond to was where are the actual artists that we're going to be bringing into the community. And that changed our whole way of thinking about the rate structure. So I just wanted to add that.
Absolutely. Well, and well, thanks for mentioning that. And also the fact that when you started paying more money, you got people who were more qualified to do the work, who were, you know, being able to spend more time. So that's awesome. It's actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's kind of a good segue to my first group question. So maybe we have, I think there's like a tech setup that's going to change. We're going to get unspotlighted or something. I hope I am. Maybe we're going back to everyone.
And if everyone can just switch over to gallery view by going up to that like top right hand corner where it says view and just switching over to gallery, then we'll all be kind of together and can see each other. It'd be awesome if you turned your camera on so we could see your smiling face and wave at each other, that kind of thing.
I feel like I want a group wave hug right now. This has been such a good conversation.
I think we should have, Renee, I think we should have everybody take their mute off and applaud this amazing
I do. I agree.
On panel.
Yes,
And all
everybody. Everybody, thank you. It has been so great. And Dan kind of set me up perfectly with that like learned mistakes issue. And everyone really talked about this a little bit in their presentation, but maybe after hearing all of our, you know, all the other presentations, and we're feeling like we're in a safe space, I'd love to hear more about those moments in artist selection for your organization or for yourself as artists where, you know, you had a moment where you're like, wow, I really should be doing something else differently, or you helped navigate through a tough situation with artist selection that you would want to share. A couple of you mentioned the kind of artist selection on panels, either, you know, real politics with elected people or just internal politics. And that's a real thing to navigate, right? Like when you're dealing with different levels of expertise and different types of expertise in a room. Any thoughts on that? No one wants to answer that terrible question.
I can
Richard
answer
does.
that
Good.
question.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
I can answer that question. Yeah, so you know, a big thing for us was really navigating the sort of complex dynamics of city government was, I think, a really, really tricky part, right? And like of this entire, both the selection process and then sort of the onboarding process for the artists, right? You know, city government, our city government at least, has this like a long history of new administrations coming in and having these like big, bold ideas to transform city government. And then, you know, they play out for a little bit and then that sort of goes away. And so one of the things that I feel like was kind of a moment in our sort of building our selection process is just trying to really reaffirm that that the artists that were coming in as part of this project are going to be coming in and being able to present these new ideas, but aren't coming in to tell folks what their jobs are like, because they're already in them. And so it was a really interesting balancing act. And I feel like what we really had to do about halfway through the sort of first quarter of our process was have this moment where we could bring city employees together and then the artists and other folks, community members that are on our advisory group together to sort of really dispel some of the myths about what is in city government and what is not in city government. And the history of city government in general, right? Just like the history of the people that are actually working at the department and division level. And that was, I think, that was a thing that we didn't anticipate as well as we could have, and caused some really unnecessary friction. And I think we worked through it well, but was definitely sort of a moment where we had to like stop and regroup a little bit, in addition to revamping our application process at the last minute.
Any other panelist response to that question? Matt?
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, I can say that in our project, we had, because we were moving into a larger process that had been ongoing, and it was such a large regional process that there are a great many existing groups that were informing that, which streamlined a lot of our work in that we were able to simply tap in and make use of these existing groups that were already set up for different aspects that needed to be considered. But it also kind of created some immovable blocks, so to speak, in terms of how many people needed to be at the table at any given time. And we even broke up aspects of the jury selection into multiple sessions to make sure that we had a well-rounded set of participants. But even still, in terms of trying to strike a balance where there was the right stakeholders in terms of buy-in and having all of the perspectives that we wanted, it was still difficult to keep that jury size to something smallish and manageable in terms of getting realistic discussion and thought and reflection and good voting. And in that, we still, as I mentioned, had trouble getting any of the people who were on the jury who had more confidence in their ability to make artistic decisions were also ones who were maybe part of leadership such that they didn't really have a lot of vote. And so we tried to do a lot to help provide spaces for discussion where they could advance some ideas and suggest some ways of thinking, even if we didn't always have that perspective inherently in the voting population of our juries.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Any other comments from our I have another question, and then I'd like to actually just turn it over to everyone else to ask questions, so it's not just me talking. And this one, we talked a lot about barriers, and I'm curious. Sorry, I should have formulated this question a little better. In my own practice as an arts administrator in the last year, I've started working with a new client where some barriers of entry for artists that I haven't dealt with before have come up. And so I've started doing things like making an audio recording of the entire call for artists and putting it on Vimeo for people who are not going to be able to read a PDF, right? So all of those kinds of things. Having information sessions for artists ahead of time so they can learn more about the process, having interpretation and translation available. And I'm just curious, and this could be for anyone who is attending or the panelists, just any of those kind of tips and tricks that you can offer and what impact they had, in addition to Richard, who I think talked about this a lot, that you'd like to share. And then I actually have one more important question before we.
I mean, this wasn't really specific to an individual artist, but I think the pandemic taught us a lot in terms of what accessibility can be in planning for future considerations to incorporate artists that may not typically be considered accessible for the work that we're trying to do. Like, what we got to rethink what on-site engagement looks like. We got to rethink how workshops can be facilitated. And we're at a point now where we put the investment into technology for our organization. So we no longer needed to feel like we were limited in terms of where an artist lives, that we have the ability to compensate to have them participate in a direct engagement. We had our first houseless artist participate and they were bouncing between Philadelphia, New York, Los Angeles, and New Orleans during their entire residency. We had our first artist with a physical disability that we were really able to accommodate in an effective way because we had invested in all of this other support that makes their work more valuable and more accessible to our local community.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Any other feedback on that question? Okay, I saw there's a couple questions in the chat. I have one more question I wanted to ask everyone, but I'm gonna switch over to that. And Margie and Lynn, feel free to jump in if I've missed any chat questions. But here's one from Marty, which is, what were some of the qualities and factors that artists brought to the projects? And I don't know, Marty, if that's a question to everyone on the panel or a specific panelist.
To everyone.
Okay.
Just that after all that work, I mean, my goodness. My goodness. There were probably, now looking back, you can actually articulate some of the qualities that actually got you to pick who ended up being chosen, whether that was you or a panel or the department.
I can respond to that if unless anyone else wants to. Yeah, I think one of the fascinating things about our process is because we were working with 3 different departments. There were 3 totally different sets of personalities and goals and objectives and sizes and scopes for each of the departments. So it's like one that environmental quality and public works in our city, which is 700 employees, and then there was one that had 40, finance. So it's just completely. It was what was really interesting is that they all sort of settled on like at the very beginning of the finalist process. They were like, oh, each of them sort of identified a person that they really, really wanted to talk to. And then those artists throughout all of the process ended up being the ones that sort of made it through. and they're from three wildly different. One is a quilter, one is a filmmaker, and one's a stand-up comedian. And they had just sort of the most radically divergent things. And the thing that was so fascinating to me was like, if we tried to do this on like the whole city scale, right? That like it would be so difficult to try and find people that sort of match the goals and interests of each of those departments. So it's just really fascinating to see the different departments' preferences and goals.
Richard, can you just say what some of those goals were? I mean, it sounds like there was a synergy, but
yeah. So, you know, for environmental quality and public works, they ended up going with a filmmaker, and they were really interested in telling the stories of folks that work inside city government and the history that a lot of them have in both in their job and then outside of their job, right? A lot of the folks in waste management and recycling and streets and roads. And then finance had a completely different problem. They're like, we can't get anyone to care about the city budget. So that was like a, you know, radically different thing that they're interested in. They ended up going selecting a quilter who's doing some really fascinating, interesting work. And then our Department of Social Services ended up going with a stand-up comedian because who had actually gone through their programs at one point in her past. And because they were really interested in raising up the sort of story of someone who had gone through their programs, been really successful, and now could come back and bring joy to folks that are in the Division of Family Services. So there's really three radically different goals and objectives for each of those departments.
thanks. Maybe that financial department can pick the comedian next time too.
They're pretty funny on their own. They're pretty funny on their own.
That's awesome. I'm wondering, do the panelists have any questions for each other before we open it up to all the attendees again?
Renee, it sounded like Matt might also have a response to that last question.
Oh, he did. I'm sorry, Matt. I missed you.
Oh, it's fine. I was just going to say that, you know, taking that same question, but looking at the way in which having artists do some work towards like a concrete problem solving sort of thing, each of our artists really approached the concept of safety in radically different ways. And I thought that was, you know, it was rewarding to see all of the different ways that was approached. Plus, and I thought their whole project was centered on the idea that they were creating a new, how do we create a new relationship with someone, something, and so therefore, how do we start to become more comfortable with the river? And that was the approach to safety, because safety ultimately was such a unique and individual experience in terms of where those boundaries are. It was impossible for an artist to come up with it in the sense of like an engineering standard. The project just didn't flow that way. So those different perspectives, I think, were really useful. And especially for anybody who saw the project, many populations felt more reflected in that aspect of the project than anything else, I think.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Margie. Catherine has a question. To any of the panelists, was there a specific piece of review criteria you were really glad you had in place? I would be curious if any particular one stands out to you as having been helpful in grounding reviewers or advancing their deliberation.
Yeah, I can share. The question about experience and social engagement specifically is sort of the most important for us, because it not only identifies experience, but it also speaks to the way in which the artist defines social engagement. And our panelists have diverse experiences, and they themselves are not always as they don't necessarily have the social engagement experience that we're looking for in the individual we're hiring. So having a narrative opportunity for the artist to explain the way that they make relationships and then create work in response to communities has always been the most important way that we shape our deliberating conversations as well.
Thanks, Dan.
Julie, did you have your hand up there?
Me?
Yeah.
I did. I was kind of referencing the previous question, but when we were talking about how the artists come to the communities and what we do to prepare them, You know, I was thinking about like on Cheyenne River, because we're on a reservation and it's just this hub of all this history and trauma and all these different things. Like those are all things that we need to consider when we're talking about who we're going to bring into the community. And so, like, you know, when you think about graffiti writers and you think about all the artists, there's a lot of ego that's usually attached to that sort of thing. So the artists who do come here really have to kind of leave that at the door, want to be part of something that's so much bigger than them. They want to be part about building a community, building an organization, and you really got to want to be working with kids and help them develop that skill set. So it's a little different for us in how we choose our artists. And the biggest thing for us is that we build a relationship, and that's why I start to work with them so early on, and that's why so many of them come back each year, because I think they really found a place that they can give back and be a part of something, you know, really special. But you know, as the community member, making sure that I find people who sit well, who fit into what we're trying to accomplish is number one for us, you know, and then we start talking about everything else. So, you know, every artist, I Zoom with them, I talk with them, I get examples of their artwork, and then I'm in touch with them for just months and months and months.
Mm.
I have a question for Christine. Thank you, Julie. That's really, I mean, I think the whole idea of the way that you select the artists and curate them is so incredible, and just really mindful of what the community needs and what the community doesn't need, and what's going to be able to, you know, who are the artists that are going to really be able to work within the community and with the community in a way that's authentic and resonant and really in line with the values. And having been at Red Can, there's a whole other process that Julie goes through every day to invite people into the work that's really amazing as well. So thank you, Julie. Also, I kind of just want to pull Christine into the conversation a little bit here. Christine, come on back. What, in terms, we've been talking a lot about, you know, the arts administrative role in all this, and how to select the artists and work with artists and those kinds of things. But as you're listening to this conversation, are there any takeaways that you have that you want the folks in the room to leave with, in terms of just, you know, ways that you've worked with different organizations that you felt were helpful, or, you know, particularly strong ways to work with artists?
I mean, a lot of like my best experiences have been longer term residencies where it's really a partnership or collaboration with the institution. And when there's like key staff people who have dedicated time to support the residency, that's one of the most important things. I think when there's been like, you know, like nonprofits have high staff turnover, and sometimes like a nonprofit will restructure and they'll take away. I've been in a residency where they've taken away the residency manager and vacated the position and had her do some like event programming to help raise money. And it's kind of like, it's like, it's not good. I think especially when there's any kind of project-based commission, it really becomes like a partnership or collaboration with that person. So that's super important. I think I've also seen organizations want to increase their diversity and equity, and then they'll kind of like rely on staff people who have different language abilities to do translation, but not necessarily support them by decreasing the amount of their workload. If they just add it and expect people to do it and find a way. So I think those are some ways. Yeah.
I have one of the questions I want to ask the whole room, actually. I don't have an answer to this. This is I'm going to take advantage of all these smart people in the room. You know, one of the things about an interview situation for artists is that very few artists are in the position. This is about power. Very few artists are in the position to piss off the people that they're being interviewed with. And so when you get around to, well, do you have any questions for us? It's just kind of ridiculous, right? Because some of the questions that you want to ask, you feel like you, as an artist, you feel like you can't ask, right? Or if you have any feedback, you can't give it at that moment. So I'm curious if artists in the room or anyone has ever come up with a way to kind of even that playing field, right? For the artists who may be more risk averse to kind of really talk to the people commissioning them about what they want. You know, what do they want to get out of this? You know, it's not just a date for the panel to pick the artist, but hopefully it's an opportunity for the artist to get to know the entity as well. So I'd love to hear people's comments on that, or things that they've seen, either being interviewed as an artist or as a organization. Maybe that's our next panel. Oh, go ahead, Christine.
No,
Sorry.
I think that's such a great point, Renee, that like, it's like artists feel so disempowered, and they feel like they're always looking for organizations or institutions to give them power. And I think it's like, aside from like, I think artists recognizing that like artists make up the art world. Like there are multiple art worlds, and without artists, there is no art, you know, and that we are all like resourceful and talented and have a lot of skills, and that we also have agency, and that we get to pick our partners, even though like there is that huge disparity of all those charts I showed at the beginning of this presentation. Like I think making it so that artists can feel like they need to find the opportunities that are good fits for them. And this actually isn't even like something that I think other people can necessarily help with. It's about like authenticity and self-concordance, and like understanding your own goals as an artist and your purpose in life, actually. So it's kind of like deep psychological self-reflection.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. Anyone else have any comments on that, of kind of that, the unbalance, but you know, the artist is up there on you know, giving a show basically, please like me, right? It's a terrible feeling, I think, for some people.
A couple things. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you go ahead. I was just going to call on you.
So the two things I'd offer, one is, I think I mentioned this earlier, is that for our interview process, I always do like sort of an advanced interview where it's like, let me talk to you as an artist before we bring, let me try to empower you as much as possible by actually giving you insider information about the other interviewers, and then like being very transparent, like this pre-interview is not at all being used to evaluate your ability. So if you have any provocative or concerning questions, ask them now. Like, oh, I don't speak another language. Is that going to be an issue? I'm like, thank you for saying that. I don't. And then we talk through what might be a disadvantage. How can we talk about ways to either turn it around, or think of other ways to that emphasize other strengths for them as an applicant. And that I think I've gotten feedback has been helpful for theirs. And the second thing I would say is just briefly, and it's anecdotally from another individual, but one of the things these monthly artist grants has unlocked is an opportunity to hear directly from other artists in terms of the way they experience other interviews and application processes, and getting to hear what type of experience leads to empowerment, and hearing artists talking about this was particularly a Black cisgender male talking about an interview in white spaces, getting interviewed in white spaces, and he knows that part of his value to those spaces is racial, and so he is able to talk to that interviewing entity, saying in a way that says, I know that what you need from me, so I'm going to speak to what I need from you, because clearly I am bringing value to this space outside of just my technical ability. So those are a couple things I would offer.
Thanks, Dan. And then there's two people.
We have two people that are, Nutapal, you had your hand up, and I thought I was calling on you earlier. So if you want to go next, and then Jerica asked a couple of questions in the chat about community engagement prior to artist call. So Nutapal, would you go next?
Thank you,
And I
Lynn.
don't know if I pronounced your name properly, so please
Yes,
correct me.
my name is Natapon. I am calling in from Santa Fe, New Mexico at the Santa Fe Art Institute, traditional territory of Oge. Thank you, panelists, for sharing your reflection, and also to the question about the interviews and artists. And I'm going to speak from an artist perspective, even though my role here is an art administrator, but I'm also a visual artist. And following up to what Christine had brought up, it is about the mind, it is about the mindset. And oftentimes we have to remind ourselves not to give our power away that much. And as far as what I do, and also in conversation with my friends, artists, friends who are artists of color as well, is really truly to vet the organization that we're gonna enter the interview. You know, where are they getting their funding? Where are the sources of the funding coming from? What are the past exhibitions that or works or commissions or whatever it may be? What are the themes, and what are the overall patterns and sequences? Are there mostly historically white artists? And am I interviewed to do the work for the organization? So those are very important questions to enter. And yeah, that's just my reflection on your questions. And I also want to thank the panelists for offering these shared experiences and case studies for us to consider and reflect in how we can better lower the barrier of applications. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that feedback. And then who had Lynn, you were going to say someone else had a question. Sorry, I missed it. Or Julie, did you have?
From Cheyenne River Youth had a few questions about questions that were about how folks engage with the community before they created their artist calls. And then I think after this, we need to wrap.
Okay.
If anyone would like to answer that, either from the panel or from the group.
Richard, do you want to answer that? I mean, that was a real big focus of your talk.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so when we built our when we sort of built our process, right, like a lot of it was built around this advisory group that was sort of equal parts artists, community members at large, and city employees. And you know, a lot of the sort of framing of the sort of what we were trying to get out of the application really came from city employees. We spent a lot of time talking with workers across city government, across the 3 departments that we were going to be working with, and trying to get out of them what they were really looking for and what could be really helpful and transformational for their department. But then the actual how we asked the question really was sort of how we asked those questions and how we framed getting that information in the application itself really came from the artists on our advisory group. And we actually built sort of tentacles off of our advisory group. We had 4 working groups that came off of the advisory group that had people that had other people on them too. So all in all, between those sorts of 5 bodies, there's probably about 70 or 80 people that were touching this project in some form or fashion. But for a selection process and for the actual language in the application, that sort of went through our selection working group, went through our advisory group, and then we also just tried to ask as many artists in the community as possible that we hoped would apply if they thought this application was helpful for them. And so that was in our actual application workshops. That was one thing that we had 4 or 5 of them where we tried to present how the application would be formatted. We also tried to say, does this work? Is there anything we should change in the application before we release it? So it's just that sort of continual process of asking for feedback from both who the project would benefit, and then who would be applying for a residency as well.
Right. Thanks, Richard. I have just, we're about to wrap, but I have one more point that I really wanted to make before we sign off, just about transparency and kind of the respect of communication. Just something I want to share. I recently met with a group of artists who talked to me about applying through Submittable or Slide Room or one of those processes. And they opened up on their phone and showed me how many things they had applied to 6 months, 9 months, a year ago, and never heard back. And I just think that it's so tacky and mean to leave people hanging. And I just want to get to that in terms of artist time and how they manage their time and what they're looking forward to or what they're planning for. And we didn't really talk about transparency in communications a lot in this. That could be a whole other thing, but I definitely wanted to mention that as we use technology so much in the review process, like just remembering to close the loop for artists so they can, you know, move on to their next opportunity. I couldn't believe it. I was really surprised. So maybe a funny thing to end on, but I also just want to thank everyone because I met with everyone over the course of preparing for this, and I love learning about all of you. So Catherine, are you going to close us out?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Cool. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad we have recorded this because this was such amazing information, and I'm going to watch it again for sure. Thank you so much, everyone. And it's great that we'll be able to, you know, keep this because this is an issue that we get so many questions about, and we just learned so much. So thank you. Hey, on this note of reviewing applications, we are recruiting panelists for the fiscal year 22 Our Town review. And diversity is really important to us in this process, particularly, you know, thinking about how panels are composed. So diverse geography, diverse background, diverse expertise, you know, of course, folks who have arts backgrounds and arts administration backgrounds, but we're also required to have lay people, quote unquote. It's just it means, you know, that arts and culture is not part of a person's given job description. So think about if it's something that you yourselves might want to do. And, you know, if you're trying to work with anyone who is interested in creative placemaking, or you just want to bring and engage into this field more deeply, it could be a great opportunity for that person to learn more. You get to read about ways that people are thinking about creative placemaking from all across the country. So if you have any ideas for referrals, send, or you yourself would like to join up, email ot@arts.gov. I'll just type it in the chat, OT. And just let me know, we need, like, where do you or does this person live, so that we can account for that geographic diversity. A little bit of biographical info, contact information. That's really all we need. There is an honorarium. It's a couple $100 for the time spent. It's not enough, but it's what we have. So think about it. I think it's a great way for someone to build experience and exposure in this kind of grant making process, and also in the subject matter.
Thanks, Catherine. Thank you so much.
Thanks for letting me make the plug.
On behalf of LISC, on behalf of the National Endowment for the Arts, Catherine Jen Hughes is also here with us. Thank you all for being here. Thank you so much to all the amazing panelists and all the preparation you did to actually keep your presentations to that 7 minutes. It was amazing. Thank you so much for the amazing information you shared with all of us. Thank you to the grantees who are here to learn from each other and contribute to the conversation. And thank you to Renee and Margie for putting this incredible session together. And thank you to Joe, who's our tech, and to Hannah Leatherman, who really works closely with me to get all this information up. This recording will be up online on the LISC website. Hannah put that in the chat. We're in the middle of planning for an event, a series of events in November around equitable creative placemaking. So we hope we'll see you all there. And again, The TA program is available. We still have resource team members that can help you with your projects. So please just reach out to me and we can get that going. So thank you all for being here and have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks, Lynn.
Something, it's almost over.
Sure.